Chapter 4. The Psychic Prana. According to the yogis, there are two nerve currents in the spinal column, called Pingala and Ida, and there is a hollow canal called Susumna running through the spinal cord. At the lower end of the hollow canal is what the yogis call the lotus of the Kundalini. They describe it as triangular in form, in which, in the symbolical language of the yogis, there is a power called the Kundalini in a coiled up form. When that Kundalini awakens, it tries to force a passage through this hollow canal, and, as it rises step by step, as it were, layer after layer of the mind becomes open, all these different visions and wonderful powers come to the yogi. When it reaches the brain, the yogi is perfectly detached from the body and mind. The soul finds itself free. We know that the spinal cord is composed peculiarly. If we take figure 8 horizontally, there are two parts, and these two parts are connected in the middle. Suppose you add 8 after 8, piled one on top of the other, that will represent the spinal cord. The left is the Ida, and the right the Pingala, and that hollow canal that runs through the center of the spinal cord is the Susumna. When the spinal cord ends in some of the lumbar vertebrae, a fine fiber comes down, and the canal is even in that fiber, only much finer. The canal is closed at the lower end, which is situated near what is called the sacral plexus, which, according to modern physiology, is triangular in form. The different plexuses that have their centers in the spinal cord can very well stand for the different lotuses of the yogi. The yogi conceives of several centers, beginning with the Muladhara, the basic, and ending with the Sahasrara, the 1,000-petaled lotus in the brain. So, if we take these different plexuses as representing these circles, the idea of the yogi can be understood very easily in the language of modern physiology. We know there are two sorts of actions in these nerve currents, one afferent, the other efferent, one sensory and the other motor, one centripetal and the other centrifugal. One carries the sensations to the brain and the other from the brain to the outer body. These vibrations are all connected with the brain in the long run. Several other facts we have to remember in order to clear the way for the explanation which is to come. This spinal cord at the brain ends in a sort of bulb in the medulla, which is not attached to the bone, but floats in a fluid in the brain, so that if there be a blow on the head, the force of that blow will be dissipated in the fluid and will not hurt the bulb. This will be an important fact as we go on. Secondly, we have also to know that, of all the centers, we have particularly to remember three: the Muladhara, the basis, the Sahasrara, the 1,000-petaled lotus of the brain, and the Swadhisthana, next to above the Muladhara. Next, we will take one fact from physics. We all hear of electricity and various other forces connected with it. What electricity is no one knows, but so far as it is known, it is a sort of motion. There are various other motions in the universe. What is the difference between them and electricity? Suppose this table moves, that the molecules which compose this table are moving in different directions. If they are all made to move in the same direction, it will be electricity. Now we shall see why breathing is practiced. In the first place, from rhythmical breathing will come to a tendency of all the molecules in the body to have the same direction. When the mind changes into will, the currents change into a motion similar to electricity, because the nerves have been proved to show polarity under the action of electric currents. This shows that when the will evolves into the nerve currents, it is changed into something like electricity. When all the motions of the body have become perfectly rhythmical, the body has, as it were, become a gigantic battery of will. This tremendous will is exactly what the yogi wants. This is therefore a physiological explanation of the breathing exercise. It tends to bring a rhythmic action in the body and helps us, through the respiratory center, to control the other centers. The aim of pranayama here is to rouse the coiled up power in the Muladhara called the Kundalini. Everything that we see, or imagine, or dream, we have to perceive in space. This is the ordinary space called the Mahakas or great space. When a yogi reads the thoughts of other men or perceives supersensuous objects, he sees them in another sort of space called the Chittakasha, the mental space. When perception has become objectless and the soul shines in its own nature, it is called the Chidakasha or knowledge space. When the Kundalini is aroused and enters the canal of the Susumna, all the perceptions are in the mental space. When it has reached that end of the canal which opens out into the brain, the objectless perception is in the knowledge space. Taking the analogy of electricity, we find that man can send a current only along a wire, but nature requires no wires to send her tremendous currents. This proves that the wire is not really necessary, but that only our inability to dispense with it compels us to use it. Similarly, all the sensations and emotions of the body are being sent into the brain and sent out of it through these wires of nerve fibers. The columns of sensory and motor fibers in the spinal cord are the Ida and Pingala of the yogis. They are the main channels through which the afferent and efferent currents are traveling. But why should not the mind send the news without any wire or react without any wires? We see that this is being done in nature. The yogi says if you can do that, you have got rid of the bondage of matter. How to do it? If you can make the current pass through the Susumna, the canal in the middle of the spinal column, you have solved the problem. The mind has made this network of the nervous system and has to break it so that no wires will be required to work through. Then alone will all knowledge come to us, no more bondage of body. That is why it is so important that you should get control of the Susumna. If you can send the mental current through that hollow canal without any nerve fibers to act as wires, the yogi says you have solved the problem, and he also says it can be done. This Susumna is, in ordinary persons, closed up at the lower extremity. No action comes through it. The yogi proposes a practice by which it can be opened and the nerve currents made to travel through. When a sensation is carried to a center, the center reacts. This reaction, in the case of automatic centers, is followed by motion. In the case of conscious centers, it is followed first by perception and secondly by motion. All perception is the reaction to action from outside. How, then, do perceptions in dreams arise? There is then no action from outside. The sensory motions, therefore, are coiled up somewhere, just as the motor motions are known to be in the different centers. For instance, I see a city. The perception of that city was from the reaction to the sensations brought from outside objects comprising that city. That is to say, a certain motion in the brain molecules has been set up by the motion in the incarring nerves, which again was set in motion by external objects in the city. Now, even after a long time, I can remember the city. This memory is the same phenomenon, only it is in a milder form. But whence is the action that set up even the milder form of similar vibrations in the brain? Not certainly from the primary sensations. Therefore it must be that the sensations are coiled up somewhere and they, by their acting, bring out the mild reaction which we call dream perception. Now the center where all these residual sensations are, as it were, stored up is called the Muladhara, the root receptacle, and the coiled up energy of action is Kundalini, the coiled up. Probably, the residual motor energy is also stored up in the same center as, after deep study or meditation on external objects, the part of the body where the Muladhara center is situated, probably the sacral plexus, gets heated. Now, if this coiled up energy is roused and made active, and then consciously made to travel up the Susumna canal, a tremendous reaction will set in. When a minute portion of the energy of action travels along with a nerve fiber and causes a reaction from centers, the perception is either dream or imagination. But when the vast mass of this energy stored up by the power of long internal meditation travels along the Susumna and strikes the centers, the reaction is tremendous, immensely superior to the reaction of dream or imagination, more intense than the reaction of sense perception. It is supersensuous perception, and the mind in that state is called superconscious. And when it reaches the metropolis of all sensations, the brain, the whole brain, as it were, reacts, and every perceiving molecule in the body reacts, and the result is the full blaze of illumination, the perception of the self. As this Kundalini force travels from the center to center, layer after layer of the mind, as it were, will be opened up, and this universe will be perceived by the yogi in its fine or coarse form. Then alone the causes of this universe, both as sensation and reaction, will be known as they are, and hence will come all knowledge. The causes being known, the knowledge of the effects is sure to follow. Thus the rousing of the Kundalini is the only way to attaining divine wisdom and superconscious perception, the realization of the spirit. It may come in various ways, through love for God, through the mercy of perfected sages, or through the power of the analytic will of the philosopher. Wherever there is any manifestation of what is ordinarily called supernatural power or wisdom, there must have been a little current of Kundalini which found its way into the Susumna. Only, in the vast majority of such cases of supernaturalism, they had ignorantly stumbled onto some practice which set free a minute portion of the coiled-up Kundalini. All worship, consciously or unconsciously, leads to this end. The man who thinks that he is receiving responses to his prayers does not know that the fulfillment came only from his own nature, that he has succeeded by the mental attitude of prayer in waking up a bit of the infinite power which is coiled up within himself. Whom, thus, men ignorantly worship under various names, through fear and tribulation, the yogi declares to the world to be the real power coiled up in every being, the mother of eternal happiness, if we know how to approach her. And Raja Yoga is the science of religion, the rationale of all worship, all prayers, forms, ceremonies and miracles.